John, it's great to have you here. Join us. It's one of our first guests on the Stanford Founder podcast. To start it off, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're building at Terra AI.
Absolutely. My company, Terra AI, is building an AI platform for critical natural resource discovery. So we work with mining companies to help find new battery metal deposits and bring them to market faster to meet the demand for EVs, data centers, and all things electrical. My background was originally actually in aerospace engineering, like most people in mining. Did my PhD at Stanford in the Intelligent Systems Lab with Michael Kokendorfer, where my research initially focused on how to make self-driving cars and autonomous vehicles able to handle more human-like tasks. So, deciding how to navigate through other drivers and pedestrians and things like that. But over time, I shifted my focus into applying those same sorts of methods to natural resources, so wind farms, aquifers, things like that, because it felt like a very underserved area. So not a lot of AI folks paying attention to that space at the time, and I wanted to look for areas to apply this sort of AI capabilities that would have a bigger impact than what I was currently working on.
I know what John is building is one of the coolest ideas I've heard that embraces the concept of full stack AI in a very specific space. So I know you worked at a lab at Stanford and then joined started and also starting your own. So what initially motivated you to take the leap to become a founder? And walk us through the journey from Stanford to starting Terra AI.
Yeah, so after Stanford, I went and worked for a company called Cobalt Metals for 2 years. It was also, at that point, I think just a post-Series B startup, looking at a very similar problem, doing full stack exploration for critical minerals deposits, building out some key in-house AI capabilities. So I was hired to work at Cobalt on the basis of some research I had done with a professor at Stanford who was a Cobalt advisor. And my time at Cobalt motivated me in part to pursue the entrepreneurial journey. I think in part I was always going to do it, and that was always kind of an ambition of mine. But I think I saw at Cobalt firsthand how AI evolved from something that was a concept in a lab and running in simulations to something that was deployed in field in a very non-traditional environment. And getting to know the industry more intimately by working with traditional explorers and mining companies and really working kind of across the life cycle of various exploration problems. I started to see other opportunities beyond what I was working on at Cobalt to potentially make a very big difference to a very, very big problem that the world is now facing. So I think just seeing, what motivated the research I was doing at Stanford was this notion, this hypothesis that there was this solvable problem that AI could address. And I think just being at Cobalt for a couple of years gave me, validated that hypothesis in a lot of ways and motivated me to, go forward and do it that way.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think, not sure if you're paying attention on X and Twitter recently, switching gears, that a lot of people have been talking about Stanford founders, and some people are saying that Stanford founders start companies and raise funds because that's their only option. And obviously, some other people are saying that obviously because they can, right? Stanford produce really great founders, and they are on that caliber to raise funding. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I think Stanford produces a lot of good founders because it has one of the world's best technical programs, but it also has a program that is designed for real world impact. So it has, if you're an engineering student, you can take classes in entrepreneurship. There are a bunch of different programs, fellowships, everything out there. If you want to go into an entrepreneurial pursuit afterward, that gives you a much more well-rounded shot at doing so than like a purely technical focus, which was my undergrad, was just pure tech. I actually wound up getting a second degree because I felt like it wasn't well-rounded enough in undergrad. So yeah, as far as it being the only option, obviously we can all agree that's wrong. I won't even really waste too much time talking about that. That they raise funds simply because they are from Stanford, I think there is definitely an advantage to having Stanford on your resume or on the resume of the founding team. Whether or not that advantage is outsized or not, like whether or not it's justified because Stanford just does have this track record and this network and all of these other benefits to entrepreneurs, I won't say if that's overvalued or not, but I will say that like the best VC funds are not going to invest in a company simply because it's a Stanford-backed company, because every company they invest in, for 90% of them are going to have founders from Stanford or Berkeley or MIT or Michigan, like whatever, pick a school that is good at something, and they're going to have founders in their portfolio with that. So it's definitely an advantage, but it's not going to get you across the finish line with a high quality fund.
Yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think that you've also mentioned that there's a lot of great resources at Stanford, including fellowships and programs. What were some of those resources that you've utilized while during your time at Stanford, and have you found them helpful?
Yeah, I mean, the network alone is really great. I think that's, if you can figure out, there's a few different like interest-focused networks and groups you can join. So climate entrepreneurship, energy entrepreneurship. I was a member of the Excel Fellows program, which was geared toward technical backgrounded people to go out and get more hands-on experience directly working with portcos from the Excel Venture Fund. The STVP program is great. There's there's just a ton of stuff out there. I think my biggest benefit has been from both the formal education, because I had a PhD that was very technical, getting a little bit more let's say tactical advice on this is how VCs think, this is what you should have in a fundraising deck, here's timing, here's round sizing, here's how to think about all these things. That was very helpful for me just because of my background, but then also I'd say the number one persistent benefit is the network. Just knowing other Stanford founders, VCs, et cetera. I've hired a lot of people from Stanford, both direct people I've known and people that I've met through that way, and made a lot of other inroads because of it. So I think that is a huge benefit in the long run, and probably the most persistent one going forward.
So that's definitely like a great network for hiring at Stanford. I guess like in your startup journey, what do you find to be like surprisingly like easy, and what's been like surprisingly hard? And we'd love to like hear some stories, examples, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, I think customer discovery, I would say, is the thing that was surprisingly easy. Now, I had a bit of a head start because I'd worked in this space for a while, but I think in a lot of fields, in particular if you're doing an AI or computationally focused startup, there's a lot of eagerness in the industry right now to figure out how to use AI or whatever your solution might be. And a lot of corporations, in particular if you're going to an enterprise angle, are scouting technology externally more, it seems. There's a core competency that every company has, but beyond that, they're looking to onboard new tech that's not their core competency. So if you're selling into an industrial, for example, 3M is not a software company. They're going to be looking external for that. So I found that customer discovery, there's a lot of people willing to have conversations and to get very candid about things early on. And obviously there's still some learning processes along the way of who to talk to and how to ask the right questions. But I think once you figure that out, the amount of discovery you can do in a short amount of time is actually quite good. Challenging, I mean, hiring is tough. The conventional wisdom of the Bay Area has got the best talent. I don't think that advantage holds for startups as much as it used to, because it is true, but you also have Meta giving out $100 million packages for AI talent. And that's the big splashy headline example, but that is not, it's not like it's just that and everybody else is paid to market. It's quite a expensive talent pool out here. So I think we've built a great team here, but it's taken us longer than we expected because there's just so much competition for good talent out here. And one of the best pieces of advice I got early on building the company, I can't remember if it was Vinod or Sam that said this, but it was the people you hire is the company you build. So be really, really deliberate about it. And really think through the full holistic view of like how these people are going to impact the eventual company, especially the first 10. So we took a lot of time to find good people and had one or two false starts along the way, but ultimately we're incredibly deliberate about it, which made it take time, but it's ultimately worth it. So that was harder than I anticipated because we got Stanford backing and we've got this great climate goal and we've got Khosla Ventures on the cap table. That's going to really help. But the reality is there's a lot of companies that all have that same pedigree of stuff, and now you're also competing with the scale-ups and the Metas and the Googles at offering the same sort of upside. The asymmetric upside advantage for a startup is not as compelling as it once was in that front. So.
That's actually really interesting to hear. Actually, I've had quite a couple friends who moved their company out of the Bay Area. If there's one place you think people should move their company to based purely on hiring, where would that be?
I don't know. I've only ever had a company here. I know a lot of people. One of my friends is in Seattle. He seems to like it quite a bit. I think that it is strong technical talent pool there as well, but it is just a generally cheaper cost of living, cheaper overall. So I guess Seattle, but that's a very weakly given recommendation.
Sounds good. And also, I know you come from like a background in academia. So, what are some skills that you build along this way of becoming the founder?
Yeah, I'd say academic culture and startup culture are very different. The pace of things is very different than the um, way you have to think about building is very different. So, we started out definitely with I would say more of a lab culture that has evolved over time into a, fast-moving startup culture, and it's still evolving continuously. So I think for me, the biggest learnings have been in people management. How do you give people that are used to operating in one mode the right motivations and clarity to start operating in a different mode? So people are immensely technically talented, physicists and things like that. But I'll give a concrete example here. It's like a lot of them are perfectionists, right? So they want to make sure they get every little detail right before moving on to the next step. And that's fundamentally not, in a lot of cases, how you want a startup to operate. You move fast and break things is a bit of a cliche, but the move fast part at least is important. So I think for me, it was kind of a holistic journey to realizing what the cultural, academic cultural biases were in some of my team, and then so recognizing them and then figuring out how to provide the right incentives and communication so that those would be eroded over time and replaced with others. Was definitely a very much an on-the-job learning that again is still evolving. But yeah, I think building up a technical team into a product team and beyond has been a big on-the-job learning.
And I know a lot of like research founders, they raise capital purely to build research labs, but I know you guys are tackling like real world problems. So what kind of set you onto this path of like solving real world problems instead of just doing more on the like the research side?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll speak for so for me, it was always the path. I never wanted to stay in research because I had come from a sort of an applied R&D group in aerospace prior to this. So this is kind of always my goal because I knew how tenuous the transition from research into production or application can be. And my co-founder found the same thing. He was obviously a research background as well, and had a very hard time getting tech adopted by the companies and the organizations he was working with. So I think we both had similar motivations of, look, we think this stuff can make a big difference, but the reality is that the organizations that need to adopt it are not going to for a variety of cultural inertial reasons and other technical limitations. So I think we're both just motivated to let's just go out and do it ourselves. And yeah, that was for me the big motivation. Is it's not doesn't really matter how great the theory is if it never gets used.
Makes sense. And I do think it's like a really good time to kind of pull research into industry right now. As you said, customer discovery is a lot easier with this trend of AI, and people are willing to explore, willing to try new things. So it's the right time to kind of implement more innovative steps within even the more kind of traditional legacy industries.
Yeah.
So last question from my end. What advice would you give like a current Stanford student debating between starting a company, joining a big tech, or something else entirely?
Yeah, I mean, let me say one thing on the previous point before going on to that about there being a lot of AI right now. That is true, and it does have advantages. It also has some pitfalls, which is there's a lot of AI companies trying to talk to these other companies. So figuring out how and who to engage with people, and also not selling anything. Like I think a lot of founders make the mistake of coming in and saying, "I'm going to solve all your problems right away." Have frank conversations, because I think I've been on the other side of the table before as well, of somebody that's trying to onboard new tech into a larger organization, and it's a much more enjoyable conversation. I build a lot more trust more quickly if as the founder you're honest about limitations and gaps in your own knowledge and treat it as discovery. So advice I'd give to a Stanford student that is considering founding a company: understand why you want to do it. Understand what your motivations are to start. Like if you want to create something new and novel and really want to focus on tech build-up, like a startup can be a great way to do that, but it also comes with a lot of other stuff to do. You have to build a company. You have to generate revenues eventually. Like the keep it in red until it's ready sort of model can work, but you're going to be subject to the same macro cycles as everybody else, where the tolerance for these really Hail Mary deep tech plays is going to decrease in times of economic uncertainty, and it's going to be a very if that's your primary motivation, there may be other places that are better for it. If you want to start a startup just for the sake of starting a startup, I don't know about that. It's a long journey to do it well. And I would say find a problem. If that's the case, you should find a problem that you're really strong conviction about early on, that you're willing to stick with for let's say 5 to 10 years. The reality is, if to build something worthwhile, unless you're doing I think thankfully the days of like consumer apps being the major startups are kind of gone. So, but with it go the days of very fast exits. I mean, there's still some B2B enterprise stuff that can build up a quick differentiated capability, but those are going to be those rare unicorn stories, which everybody's chasing. But like the reality is, even in those cases, even if you might get that, like I think you should pick a problem that you're going to be willing to work on for five plus years at least. And then I would say the last thing is spend time with the industry that you want to work with, not necessarily working in it, but understand the status quo, understand the pain points really thoroughly. I know that's another cliche piece of advice, but especially with young startup founders that I've come across, there's this sort of notion of they don't know what they're doing. We know how to do it better. They'll just disrupt, and not really paying attention to what the kind of legacy systems are. And I think that's a huge mistake. Like, understand the problem that you're going after, because you might create something that's 10 times better in a metric that you think is important, but because of some other thing, you might be completely incompatible with kind of the industry you're trying to sell into or trying to work with. So, I think just taking the time to understand the problem and not just a proposed solution. Don't build a problem around your solution, right? It's again, another maybe cliched piece of advice, but I think especially in the age of AI, it's incredibly pertinent. Like, don't come up and say, we've got a foundation model for X and come give us some money, please. Like, somebody might give you that first round of funding, but I think you're much better off waiting to take that first tranche and explore and figure out exactly what the business model and problem and company needs to be, rather than just jumping at the first piece of capital that gets offered to you.
Yeah.
And I guess like one follow-up, how long did it take for you to kind of gather that kind of customer insights, talking to customers before you actually start on your idea?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I was building up that intimacy for years. I had done research in the space for about 2 years before starting at Kobold, which is another 2 years.
Yeah.
In terms of like actually explicitly going out and formulating a hypothesis, did that for I would say at least 7 months. Even after all that time working in industry, I probably did 6-7 months worth of explicit customer discovery and business model testing and all this sort of stuff. And by the way, I was wrong about it all by the end, but like not wrong. I had narrowed it down to a point where I knew there was something there. I knew there's a problem here. I know there's a problem that people will pay for here. I know there's a way to create value, ergo there's a way to capture value. And the specifics of the business model have evolved over time, but by the time we were pitching for our first round, we had at least the fundamentals there. Like, hey, this is a problem. If we solve the problem in this way, which we think we can because of this reason, we'll create this much value. And good VCs, will say, we're two technical founders. We're going to figure out the business model. Here's some initial ideas, and I think a good VC will go, yep, makes sense. You'll capture 20% of that value, and it's a big number. So,
yeah,
That's good.
Yeah, that's great. I think from my end, before I wrap this up, I have to say this. I haven't met you in person, but this is stuff. I bet it's not the first time that people mention this, but you look like Ryan Reynolds.
I've gotten it like twice in my life before. I don't think it's true, so I'm glad this is an audio recording. But thank you.
Ryan Reynolds looks like you.
Not in Deadpool, right? Not that version?
No, not that one. No. Green Lantern. I'm kidding.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. It's been a great time chatting with you. We've all learned a lot. And is there any parting message that you want to give to the audience?
Yeah, I'll say two things. I think first is the selfish plug. Like we're hiring. We're wrapping up a Series A raise ourselves now. We'll be growing our team both on the technical side and on our operations side. So if you're interested in working at a company that's trying to unblock some of the kind of biggest bottlenecks to everything from AI data center expansion to net zero and electrification globally, please look us up. And the second thing I would say is there's a lot of opportunity right now to apply AI outside of the areas where it's been traditionally applied, which is ad tech and other sort of e-commerce driven applications, and into really hard problems for science. I think AlphaFold was remarkable in the leap it took toward applying AI toward real physical science problems, and now we're seeing that again happen in the climate space with a lot of the work from Microsoft and Google and NVIDIA and a lot of now great startups that have come out from those. So I would encourage you, if you're an AI-centric founder, to try to find an actual important problem to solve. I think there's a lot of snake eating its own tail in this space in a lot of ways, which, de-risking the AI ecosystem is great. Like, don't get me wrong, if you have a solution to a problem, I would probably be a customer of you. But I think if you also are inclined toward anything on the physical sciences side, like I said before, it's most probably apparent in stark, the shift in attitude amongst the old industrials, amongst the kind of big, heavy industry and other things that are now looking for external and AI-driven solutions in a way they had never before. So the opportunity right now on that side of it is bigger than it's ever been, and it's more timely than it's ever going to be. So if you are inclined to start a startup here, please look at problems, and a lot of different ways you can look to explore what those problems might be. So love to see more AlphaFold and companies like that out there in the world.
Awesome. I'll stop recording now.